Picture being a kid in the early 90s. It's before the dawn of all the big budget Marvel blockbusters that we get every year or so now, when movies based on superheroes were basically unheard of. I mean, sure, you had your Superman movies, but there wasn't really that much else. Maybe a few TV things here and there, but I don't know, nothing too crazy. Well, that all changed in 1989 with the release of Tim Burton's Batman. The influence was huge, and the media frenzy to follow over the next few years was massive. And since you may watch my channel for action figure related videos, we're here to talk about all the toys that came along with the cultural phenomenon that was Batman. My name is Captain McKay, and this is the story of a boy named Michael, who became a huge Batman fan. Now, to give you a little bit of context, I was 4 years old when that movie came out. I didn't know anything about Batman since I was too young, but what I do remember is seeing the poster everywhere. The Batman logo was all over the place. You had lunchboxes and posters, magazines, and of course, toys. At the time, Toy Biz had the license. Toy Biz really didn't release much in their Batman figure line for the movie, but that's where it all began for me. See, before I knew what was about to happen, my babysitter got me a present for my birthday in 1989. The Toy Biz Batman movie figure. You've probably seen the one, or maybe even had your own if you're old like me. It came with the zip line and the belt that could double as the grappling hook from the movie. I'm pretty sure every kid I knew had that figure. To be honest, I played with it, but I hadn't quite caught the Batman fever yet. Fast forward to 1992. Batman Returns was coming out, and much of the same media frenzy was happening as the first time around. Except this time, everyone knew what to expect. Or at least they thought they did. It was the sequel to a hugely popular superhero movie, and the marketing was incredible. McDonald's tie-ins, kids merchandise, coloring books, activity books, and of course, plenty of toys. But this time, things were different. I was 7 years old, way more aware of what kind of things I thought were cool. And seeing all this marketing for the movie? Yeah, I was convinced. Batman was awesome, and I needed to see this movie. But, like I said, things were different this time. See, the movie came out, and suddenly all the reviews came right along with it. People were saying it was overly violent, and it wasn't for kids. And my mom caught wind of all this, and that was the end of that. 7-year-old Michael was not going to go see Batman Returns. I could have all the toys, I could color in the books, I could read the comic book version, I could hang out the posters in my room, but I just wasn't allowed to go see the movie. Man, I would watch reruns of the 1966 Adam West Batman show every day, learning all about the villains and the side characters. I had a couple comics at the time, but I wasn't really too interested in those. See, back then, Bruce Wayne was being written out in favor of Jean-Paul Valley, and I really only cared about Bruce Wayne. So, the comics weren't really my thing. But as far as the TV show, the movies, and the toys, I was obsessed. But anytime I would ask my mom to see Batman Returns, she'd tell me I couldn't. And I'm sure you know what happens when somebody tells you that you can't do something. Suddenly, you want to do it way more than you did initially, because everyone wants to do the things they're told not to do. Forbidden fruit, kids. It's hanging on that tree and ripe for the picking. And I tried my damnedest to pick it. But there wasn't anything I could do. The best compromise wound up being that I wasn't allowed to see Batman Returns in the theater, but I could have a VHS copy of the 1989 Batman movie. And that, my friends, was the first time I saw that movie. At home, on my TV. And let me tell you, it hooked me. Looking back and thinking of it now, after all these years, the critics saying Batman Returns was so violent was a bit off. If anything, it was more creepy and disgusting than the first movie. But violent? I think the first one is way more violent. Between Joker shooting people, electrocuting a guy down to a skeleton, Batman dropping bombs and openly firing machine guns into a crowd, Batman blowing up the chemical plant full of Joker's goons, the death toll is pretty high in that movie. Anyway, getting into some of the toys, the Batman Returns line was made by Kenner. See now, after Toy Biz lost the license, Kenner took it over and began making figures of their own for the 1989 Batman movie, called the Dark Knight Collection. This featured different versions of Batman and the Joker, both now featuring way more movie-authentic actor likenesses. Comparing the Batman head sculpts is night and day. The Toy Biz one, it's pretty bland. But the Kenner one was a spot-on replica of Michael Keaton. Although, for what it's worth, the Toy Biz Batman did have better articulation and more movie-accurate detail on the gloves. Skipping ahead to Batman Returns, Kenner re-released many of the same figures in new packaging. And this would have been my first exposure to these toys. So basically picture any different color you could imagine and paint it onto a Batman figure. Then pack them in with a silly gadget or a gimmick, and you got your toys. course, there were also figures for the two villains in the movie, Catwoman and the Penguin. Although it was pretty obvious that Penguin was just repurposed. I mean, it was the same figure as his old DC Superheroes one, and it just looked nothing like the movie version. As a kid, that bugged me. I could never understand why they didn't make a movie-authentic Penguin. I mean, we got a movie version of Catwoman. She was spot on. I also couldn't understand why we didn't get a more authentic-looking Batman. See, since they were just reusing the old molds from the Dark Knight collection, that meant that Batman was in his 1989 costume. But in Batman Returns, he wore a different-looking, more armored costume. It was sleeker, more stylized in design. I think they only ever made one figure in the line with that costume, and it was some kind of a deluxe thing that had like a weird paint scheme. I don't know. I never bought it. What was also puzzling at the time was the release of the Robin figure. This was a perfect representation of Tim Drake as he appeared in the comics at that point, but they released him in the movie line. I mean, I'm not sure why, since Robin was not in this movie at all. But I mean, as a kid, I was just happy to have a Robin figure. The vehicles were great. We got the Batwing, the Bat Ski Boat, and my personal favorite, the Missile Batmobile. The sides blew off to mimic the scene in the movie where Batman has to escape down a narrow alley. It's awesome. I still love the look of this car to this day. I couldn't get enough of these as a kid, and I was thrilled to be a Batman fan at a time when it couldn't possibly get any better. Could it? Later that same year, we got our first glimpse into true uncontested greatness in the form of Batman the Animated Series. This show was everything. It was a great blend of the huge character roster of the 1966 show, combined with the dark tone of the two movies. You got a great variety of plots and an even better dynamic between Batman and all his supporting cast. The show was a huge hit and is widely regarded by many as the absolute best version of Batman to this day. It was only a matter of time before all the toys hit. I can remember one morning, watching TV before school, and seeing the first commercial for the Batman Animated Series toy line. I knew this was going to be the definitive Batman figure line. Kenner did a great job with so many of the early figures, capturing the aesthetic of the original show designs as well as they could. Except Robin. He was just a straight up repaint of that last figure with a new head, so I mean, he didn't really fit in that well. But everyone else, awesome. My first figures of Two-Face, Clayface, Man-Bat, and so many others came from this line. Combat Belt Batman was the pinnacle of my Batman collection. This one here actually used to belong to my friend. My figure was way more beat up because he went through absolute hell. Then came 1995. The third Batman movie was well on its way. I was in 5th grade, ready to see it. The reviews were much more positive this time around, with a lot less emphasis on the film's violence and gross content. I wasn't really ready to accept a new Batman, though. I mean, Michael Keaton was Batman. And I'm not just saying that from the perspective of hindsight, where like I know all the versions of Batman we've had. I'm saying that from the perspective of a kid who only knew one movie version of Batman. Keaton was going to be pretty hard to beat in my eyes. Did that happen? Well, spoilers, it didn't. I mean, as a kid, I thought Batman Forever was good, but I could definitely tell the movie had a disconnect from the first two. It did everything that Batman Returns did as far as marketing. I mean, you had your fast food tie-ins, all your huge cross-promotion, and everything in between. But this movie was totally different. These days, I rank it as the worst of this series. Yes, I hear you ask, even worse than Batman and Robin? Yes, worse than that. We're going to talk about some of that in a little while, I guess, but first let's talk about some of these toys, okay? Batman Forever started off strong with its toy line. Plenty of versions of Batman, and it also had the two villains of the film right in the first series. Problem was, they were damn near impossible to find. I was like 10 or so, which meant I couldn't just get in the car and go figure hunting. I had to rely on whenever I was out and about with like my mom or my dad, just hoping to come across the hard to find ones. There were also a few different versions of Robin, since he was a main character in the movie now. But the strange thing was, there were never single releases of movie-accurate versions of the two heroes. Now going back to what I said about Batman Returns, I wanted a movie-authentic version of Batman. Some of the gimmick figures were awesome, and this time around, Kenner upped their game by having more individual sculpts on the figures so they'd be more unique. But we never really did get spot-on versions of Batman and Robin from how they appeared in the movie. That is, until the 2-pack came out. That was about as close as we were going to get. And while it was very close, their poses were a little weird, I thought. Kind of limited what you could do with them. But, I don't know. They're fine, I guess. The standouts for me, though, as usual, were the vehicles. I gotta admit, seeing this stuff again makes me nostalgic. We're getting high-end action figures that make this old stuff seem like straight trash. But we aren't getting the playsets or the vehicles anymore. At least, not as frequently. I mean, I can remember the Batcave command center from Batman Returns showing up, repainted, across the next 2 movie lines, as well as the animated series line. Hell, it even showed up years later, and included the only Alfred figure that I'm aware of from that time. Kenner really got their mileage out of that playset. Anyway, for all the faults of the movie itself, Batman Forever's toy line was great. The Batmobile with the top fins and the lights, holy hell, this thing is great. I still love it. The one toy that I never got was the Batcave. Not the command center one I mentioned earlier, but the giant one. It was layered in tiers, and I think I only ever saw it once. But damn, that thing was impressive. And then something happened. Batman and Robin came out in 1997. I wasn't as excited for this line. Maybe I was just outgrowing the figures. Maybe I was just burned out because Batman just went through a transition on the animated series. See, this would have been around the time they started tying his show in with the Superman animated series, and the characters all got redesigned. Now, some look basically identical. Clayface, Two-Face, Bullock, Harley Quinn, they were all barely changed. Looking back now, the newer redesigns of Scarecrow and Bane were killer. Much more menacing than their original versions, I think. Penguin going back to his comic roots was also a welcome addition. But the Joker? What the hell's going on with this? I mean, Batman didn't change much, just kind of went to a more bare-bones costume. Robin was Tim Drake this time, so him having a different costume was fine with me. But what was interesting is that in the original animated series, we got Dick Grayson as Robin. But see, he never wore the original Robin costume that Grayson wore in the comics. He wore Tim Drake's Robin costume. So by the time Tim Drake was introduced, they gave him a totally new costume, which incidentally would wind up looking fairly similar to one that he would eventually wear in the comics in the late 2000s. Talk about going full circle. Alright, never mind. I'm done babbling about Robin. Let's talk about some toys. The figure line for Batman and Robin was largely gimmicked. The movie was basically just meant to sell merchandise to kids. People think this is the worst Batman movie out of the bunch, but like I said earlier, I prefer it to Batman Forever. Reason being, the tone of the movie is consistent. This movie is a comedy, through and through. I want you to try and tell me what kind of a movie Batman Forever is. Is it a stylized action movie? Is it a slapstick comedy with Jim Carrey hamming it up as Riddler? Is it a deep psychological piece about dual identity? I mean, it tries to be everything. It doesn't really wind up being anything. Batman and Robin, though? It's a big budget episode of the 60s TV show. The problem is, that's not what fans wanted, and so this movie single-handedly killed the franchise until it was rebooted many years later. As for the figures themselves, they're alright, I guess. I only had a few. I got one of Robin, which was basically in his Nightwing costume from the comics. See, the movie design was pretty much just Nightwing's costume, so I mean that was fine by me. The interesting thing about this line was the inclusion of Bane. Now granted, Bane was in the movie, and he was completely underwhelming, but the figure? It was a spot-on representation of his comic book version. Just like Robin from the Batman Returns line, somehow this movie line snuck in a comic-accurate action figure. I was always appreciative of that. The rest of the line, though, that was ridiculous. You got your assortment of vehicles, as you might suspect. The Batmobile's cool. I mean, I think it's a nice-looking car, and it makes for a good toy, I think. Even though having no canopy is highly impractical when criminals are probably going to be shooting at you. I can still appreciate the design, though. But by the time this movie came out, I was kind of straying away from collecting Batman figures. I mean, not because I stopped liking Batman, but just because things had gotten a little out of hand. I was getting into some other things around that time, too. Wrestling and video games and things like that. It's just the sort of thing that became more what I would do with my spare time and money. Batman was always a part of my life, but I took some time away from collecting all the merchandise. Now obviously today, there are no shortage of Batman figures out there for collectors. Pretty much everyone has had a chance to make a Batman toy. Hasbro, Mattel, DC Collectibles, DC Direct, NECA, SH Figuarts, Mafex, Hot Toys, Sideshow, Mezco, Lego, and the list goes on and on. I picked up again with collecting Batman figures with the advent of Mattel's DC Superheroes, and later, their DC Universe Classics. The figures are good, for the most part, and the variety of characters is welcome. Then along came the imports, the high-end stuff, and everything out there now. It's a good time to be a collector. Expensive, to be sure, but good nonetheless. There's something to be said for these figures, and how they can still be something that people are interested in all these years later. Batman's just one of those characters who've been around for decades, and the types of merchandise that comes along with that, it's insane to think about. What's also insane to think about is how I can still remember all these little details. My desire to go see Batman Returns in the theater, and how not being allowed to started this obsession with Batman that became a fandom that I hang on to even today. I mean, what if I was allowed to see the movie without any resistance, or without my mom saying I couldn't? Would I still have become such a fan? I would think that I'd still be a Batman fan either way, since the animated series was about to hit the ground running at that point, and that Batman's marketability was about to be through the roof. But, who knows? So I hope you enjoyed watching this whole thing. I didn't know what to expect when I decided to make this video. Mostly I guess I just wanted my audience to get the chance to know where I came from as far as my fandom, and where I got started with collecting the things I like. And maybe you're not even somebody who's regularly a viewer of my channel. I mean, feel free to have a browse around, but if you're just interested in Batman figures from years gone by, I appreciate you checking this out all the same. If you're interested in this type of video, leave me a comment. I'd be happy to make more, explaining my other interests. I mean, Godzilla, wrestling, Ninja Turtles, X-Men, etc. If you're curious, let me know. Thanks for watching this video. My name is Captain McKay, and I hope you'll check out some of my stop motion animation on this channel. And yeah, there are even a few Batman videos to watch. Till the next time I catch you. Later on.